Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borag Thung, Earthlets, and welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. I am your host, Mulchar, and on this lockdown tapes, it's a bit of a funny bone special, really. We talked to Ned Hartley and Piper last week about the Core Buster special. This week we've got Olivia Hicks on, who is the writer on the Daisy Jones Locket story. She's also a bit of a comics scholar. She's currently studying for a PhD up in Dundee, which has an excellent graphic art and comic book course. So we chat a little bit about the importance of kids' comics, how they've changed over the years, why they have the conventions that they do, things like that. So that was fantastic. Really enjoyed talking to Olivia. And then we've also got Chloe Maveal, who's a comics journalist. She writes for the Comics Beat. And we do a deep dive onto Zombo by Ewing and Henry Flint, which is one of my favourite strips and is a perennial favourite. Much missed in the prog. Hopefully have more in the future. But we pick over the gentleman zombie and explain why we both love it so much. So there's lots of talk about bums and things like that. Yeah, can't wait. So don't forget that if there's any guests that you'd like us to interview or themes that you'd like us to explore, drop us a line to thrillcast, that's all one word, thrillcast at 2000ad.com, and we'll do our absolute level best to accommodate that. In the meantime, do make sure you catch up on the other episodes. Next week's feature interview is going to be with Carl Critchlow, who is returning to 2000 AD for an excellent little Dread story. Carl, long a favourite of mine, all the way back to his painted days in the 90s, but the creator of Thrud the Barbarian, and somebody who's actually been quite a presence over the last 20 years, the Rebellion era of 2000 AD. So it was great to be able to chat to him. No video on that one, unfortunately. It was all over the phone. But absolutely fascinating. So let's crack on with this episode as we talk to Olivia Hicks about the Core Buster special. For people who don't know you and your work, do you want to explain a little bit about who you are and your involvement with comic books?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Olivia, and basically I'm a small press comics creator up in Dundee, Scotland. So I make zines and comics that I sort of self-publish myself. But also I'm a PhD student, and my PhD topic is on girls' comics from Britain and America from, 1949 to 1979 or something like that. I should be a bit clear on it because I'm supposed to be submitting about 2 months time, but I'm still not quite clear on it. But yeah, so I'm doing a PhD on sort of teen superheroines in British and American girls comics, and then I also make sort of independent comics in my spare time.
Excellent. I was always told never to trust a PhD student who knows definitely what they're writing about until the very end of their work. So the reason we're chatting is because the Core Buster special has been out for about a week, and you've got a strip in there which is Daisy Jones's Locket.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved in the special in the first place.
Yeah, so I had done some work for you guys for the Women's Sci-Fi special in 2018. So I keep getting in touch to ask if I'd want to write a script for Core Buster. I was really excited because I have a weird sort of family connection to it, and that Core was the strip that my dad and my grandfather read. So it's and my dad had a forgotten annual in the basement that I would read all the time. So I've got a real passionate childhood connection to Core. So I was so excited to work on Core. I was like, this is my moment, I've made it. Horror and Gus are my two favorites from the classic strips. So I was so excited to work on Core Buster anyway. And then I saw the title and I didn't know anything about the character, but the initial pun of the title, I was like, this is so good. How could you say no to this character, Daisy Jones's Locket? I was like, I love it. So Keith very kindly sent me over like a couple of the classic strips, and it was very much like, it's very much like always double entendres, play on words, not double entendres, but like a lot of play of words, sort of dad jokes, puns, which is all very much what my humor is anyway, growing up on Mel Brooks films. So I was like, great, it's a strip where there's just puns. And then I didn't immediately see a strip where there were pirates in it. So I was like, well, this is the thing that we must have. Therefore, you cannot have a character called Daisy Jones's Locket and not explore some sort of a crazy pirate universe. I've always wanted to write a story about pirates, and I finally got my chance with this one. And it was just, yeah, I just sort of sat and tried to think about silly, fun pirate jokes I could make, and sort of what the setup would be and how you could possibly get pirates into this universe, and I worked it out, and yeah, and then and that was kind of it really as a strip.
The artwork on this is also fantastic. I mean, it evokes so many things to me, but particularly the kind of Hanna-Barbera God, it's still too early in the morning. Hanna-Barbera, no, but Barbera. Yeah. I haven't had any tea yet. I'm just going to make that quite clear. So
I had a cup of tea because I had to do my weekly shop, so I'm a little bit wired and stressed out from that experience. But at least I'm a cup of tea into it. Yeah, it's like the Jetsons.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And Flintstones. It's that sort of era of Hanna-Barbera rather than like the Scooby-Doo stuff. Yeah. So my comps arrived yesterday, and so I was like, oh my gosh, and like immediately ready to open to have a look at it. And I'd like seen like a little bit of previews from the interviews that had been put up yesterday as well. So I was like, I've got to see what this art is. I've just been hearing all this buzz about this artwork, but I hadn't seen it. And I saw it, and Shelley and Brain just did like just the most insane job. I'm 100% biased, but I'm like, this is just the most gorgeous art I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, it's so beautiful. Like the color scheme is so nice. I love a muted sort of modernist sort of two-tone color scheme, and they just have such a like a warm, inviting character designs that they've managed to give everybody. And it's sort of very classic, but it's like, it is kind of classic in that Hanna-Barbera 60s way, but it doesn't feel like old-fashioned. It feels so fresh, it feels so modern. It just is, I'm just astounded by, and they had a lot to sort of put into each page, and the artwork just breathes and it flows really well, and they've really sort of made sure that everything gets its right moment and it's not too packed, which is my fault because I'm the writer. I put many words in, but they just made it all work seamlessly, and just skill involved. I'm still overwhelmed by it. I think it's amazing.
Was this kind of strip different to what you were doing with small press stuff, or is it in the same kind of wheelhouse?
No, it's a bit different. I don't do kid stuff normally. I just sort of write for teens or adults. But everyone's always like, oh, I could write a kid's comic. Sure. I'd worked for like Beano for a hot minute for like a 3-month temporary placement a couple of years back now. So I like had a little bit of experience of working with British kids comics. But yeah, it was a bit different because normally I sort of do more sort of body horror, like fluid sort of queer romance and like 50s sort of things. So this was like very different. And I do want to say to everybody that this was written, Keith asked me to write this in August, so I probably sent the script off before 2020 arrived upon us. And if I was rewriting the script today, I would not have taken a part at the Royal Mail. They're doing great work in our time of crisis. They do not deserve any cannons aimed at them, but it was written in a different universe.
To be fair, a lot of people are having to reevaluate their priorities and their attitudes because of this.
Yeah, I was like, oh, no one could possibly get mad about a Royal Mail getting a canon joke. And then now I'm like, oh,
no! So when do you keep it? It's really interesting with the Core Buster special, the variety of different, not just art styles, but writing styles as well. So we had Ned Hartley on last week, who wrote Grimly Fiendish. And his work with Tom Patterson is great because he kind of gives Tom the opportunity to just go wild with all the gorgeous little details and little jokes that he puts in. And you were just saying about packing things in. How important is it to really give sort of kids something to get their teeth into with these stories?
Oh, I think it is important. I think sometimes there's a danger that you sort of make things too simplistic and too clear cut for kids, and sort of quite obvious about how it goes. And children are generally quite sophisticated readers, but having said that, they also love poo jokes. So you got to like balance those two sort of warring factions. I don't. I feel like it's always they tell me how many pages I have, and then I immediately come up with a story that's for a page longer than what we have to work with, and so then I have to like cram it all in really tightly. But I think there's just so much going on in that strip, like in terms of like there's like 3 or 4 different sort of key joke little bits that happen. There's like so much sort of happening in the artwork. I feel like I mean, like I think you can just sit and look at that sort of, especially because the artwork's so good, you can sit and look at it for ages, and hopefully it'll keep the kids entertained for a hot minute while they're all sort of indoors driving the parents mad. But I think it is important that you have like just lots of fun sort of like you got to just keep it at like a sort of like at a, it's kind of weird because it's sophisticated but it's not sophisticated at the same time to make it interesting for children. And I think especially in the UK, we come from a tradition of just our comics are just packed in the pages. Like you will get 10 panels and don't even worry about it. Like that's like the standard for the Beano as well. So it's like we do come from a tradition, sort of a children's comics tradition in the UK of like way more sort of stuff happening per page and like a whole story happening in a page. Within the US, it's much more of like, 28 pages to tell one story, 6 panels, more sort of more the norm. I don't know if that's answered your question. I feel like it hasn't.
No, it has. It has. I ask because, as you say, good comics for kids are difficult to come by these days because so much of the high street newsstand, as it was just mere years ago, was licensed tie-in stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Was a bit of plastic tat on the front. Some comic content, but more kind of activity books to keep a kid quiet for a little while. But the tradition that Cora and Buster come from, and I guess that you are actually looking into with your work and also with your writing, is much more involved in that. It's much more, as I said, meaty and for kids. How important do you think it is that we're continuing with kids comics as they were in a way, even though there's slight sort of retinkerings with this? Is it important that that tradition is maintained, or is this an evolution of how things of comics for kids?
Yeah, I think that there's some sort of really great stuff about the old British comics I wish sort of would be bring forward a bit more. Like when you read them today, there's so much death, so much like an unnecessary amount of death and mutilation, one might say. But I think not necessarily that we need to have more death in comics, but I think what it is that they sort of weren't afraid to sort of show kids a little bit more of the darker side of the world. And that's generally what makes sort of an enduring children's sort of creation. Like if you think about Roald Dahl, if you think about Neil Gaiman, if you think about sort of the tradition of children's comics they put out, they're quite dark, and that's sort of, but that is even Harry Potter's got some dark elements to it. And I think we sort of think that as you get older, you always think that children have to be more and more sanitized and more and more kept away from these sort of darker elements. But these sort of stories that have been written are so popular and have endured for so much because they do have this sort of sense of danger, this sense of threat. I think that's sort of the traditional UK comics sort of had that a lot more, and I feel like we've sort of started to maybe lose that. But I think bringing back stuff like the Misty and the Scream special is sort of continuing that sort of element of in my time it was Goosebumps, was everybody was obsessed with, and it gave you nightmares but you couldn't stop reading it. So there's an element that we need to have slightly more sort of like not be quite so afraid with what we write for kids, because I feel like if it's always the same one note world, it's not maybe very exciting for them. So I think it's important that we sort of carry on that sort of tradition of writing sophisticated stories for children and sort of meeting children on their level a little bit more. I mean, like they're in the middle of a pandemic right now. I think they're pretty aware that stuff is not always sunshine and roses. But I think it's also the stories were so interesting. The stories were so interesting. I mean, obviously, this is my passion, is these sort of weird stories. Justice of Justine with her little arrows, and there's another one in Ginty as well, where like the termites, the ants, like the ant people, they're like they're a group of Olympians who get brainwashed into becoming these evil workers for this termite villain or something, and they're all sort of underground. Like those sort of stories are just absolutely bonkers, and they're sort of so exciting and so imaginative, and it's something that you just do not get to see on the stands in any way, shape, or form nowadays. And I don't think what we all want to do is just completely replicate it, because I think times have moved on and it is a different sort of world that we live in now. But I do think that there's sort of elements of those stories that we can take forward, sort of these sort of more complicated stories, these sort of sophisticated, darker, I've said sophisticated 16 times now, but like more darker material that I think could really breathe something new to British children's comics. I think the Phoenix does a little bit of that. They try and have sort of like more sophisticated, I'll find a different word in a second. They have sort of more variety of storytelling happening. But I think there's like, I don't know, I think when you look at what cartoons are doing, are comics at that, like sort of at the complexity of the storylines, are they at? And I think by sort of incorporating those sort of some of those storytelling ethos from the past, we can sort of start to move comics towards where cartoons are right now and surpass them.
I wanted to kind of ask a bit about your academic work, and whether your views on things like girls' comics, things like comics for kids, have changed as you have researched them, as you have looked at the history of them, the structure of them, the way that they were produced, and do you think that there's still a hunger there for kids' comics?
Yeah, I think why wouldn't a child want to be entertained by something? I think the only reason that the reason we don't have that strong, robust storytelling now is more because of publishing inadequate. Like it's more the fault of the publishers and sort of the 80s and 90s, and sort of like not sort of seeing value in the comics, rather than children being over that as a storytelling medium. Because when you look at sort of what graphic novels are doing, like the graphic novel format was being like, that's booming still. Like, I mean, it's a couple years old at this point, but when you think of what like Lumberjanes and the excitement that was around that, the excitement that was around sort of, I'm just gonna look over my comic shelf to see what's on my shelf and like what comic I could mention. But like when you look at sort of like the graphic novel and the book format stuff that's coming out, and how popular that is with children. Even stuff like DC Superheroes Girls got like a big amount of traction, even though it wasn't the greatest like property reimagining that they've ever had in their life, but just there's a hunger for these stories and to be represented in this way. I think there's a lot of focus on sort of superhero stuff, and they could be focused more on, I don't know, clear-cut comedy stuff, which we don't necessarily have the same tradition as in the US. So yeah, I think it's important that that sort of storytelling tradition continues, because I don't think there's any reason why children wouldn't like to see it, as long as it's sort of relevant to them. But yeah, I mean, I don't think my opinions have my opinions changed. They have in a very boring academic way, because what I sort of think about a lot is sort of imperialism. So not in like a fun way that people want to see brought back, but generally I'm sort of thinking about like racism and imperialism in these comics. It wasn't what I meant to start out studying, but it's what sort of has ended up being what I'm sort of thinking about for a superhero framework. So I'm not sure I necessarily have anything positive from that to bring into this discussion, because I'm like so jaded at this point. I'm like, the imperialism. But I do think there's just something fun about these stories, like the old girls comics, where they have like so much class consciousness, like, and so much sort of talking about injustice, talking about sort of social economic problems, which I just don't think we have in the same way. And I feel like that is a bit of a shame. But I feel like there's something to be said for sort of wanting to tell these darker stories, but also comics writing has moved on, and there's really sort of, I just about got myself sophisticated for the 50th time. But there's like, so when you look at sort of some of the stuff that's coming out of the American sort of more independent market for children, I think there's something about like bringing all that together, and like, and that will be the future of comics in the post-direct market system. But yeah, I think that bringing these comics back is just it's a good thing, because we have just such great archives of material that we just sort of we're sort of forgetting. And I think these stories are so interesting, and so it's such a strong comics culture and such a brilliant comics culture in the UK, that for it to be sort of reduced only to one or two things that we remember is sort of, especially because that generally means that the girl stuff is getting forgotten. I think it's important to sort of hold on to this and evaluate this, because if we don't understand our pop culture from the past, how will we understand ourselves? Like, it's sort of a mirror into our society and like sort of how we thought about things.
You're based in Dundee.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, if you're looking for kind of the comics capital, and it's not Oxford, where we and the Phoenix are, then Dundee is it, because of course of DC Thompson. We had Ian Kennedy on earlier this week talking about his apprenticeship in post-war Dundee at DC Thompson. How much have you been influenced in your writing and your choices by that rich heritage of humor comics? Because of course you got the Beano and the Dandy, which were together the longest running comics. Dandy sadly no longer with us. R.I.P.
R.I.P. Dandy.
Yeah. So how much has that been an influence, or you know, is your gaze wider than just that kind of genre?
No, I think it's because obviously I think comedy is sort of the way I sort of write about things. I generally try and be funny about it first before I'll try and be serious about something. So comedy is a huge sort of part of like how I express myself as a writer, but I don't necessarily think that the influence comes from the sort of classic Beano and Danny, because I didn't get to see them enough as a kid. So I think the influence for that is probably more stuff like the Kate Beaton sort of webcomic stuff, which I read a lot growing up, like as a teenager. But I think Dundee's been really influential to me in sort of the small press side of things. Dundee's been really influential to me because it has a very strong small press sort of community. And so that's why I found my home as a creator. That's why I sort of found a voice as a creator. And that's where people sort of nurtured me and sort of inspired me and helped me work out how to put together zines. So I think I'm so connected to Dundee, but like very much in sort of the small press community and what they are doing and sort of the fantastic work that they put out, and we just inspire each other constantly. DC Thompson, I mean, the humor comics, not so much. I don't know. Like, it's really weird because it's stuff like, because I feel like British comics was always just like a Indiana Jones thing for me. Like, you would see these weird sort of dusty pages that like do you ever, annuals that have sort of stayed in the family for 30 years, and so they don't have covers anymore, and then you see them as a kid and they're just completely, they had no meaning to me.
Literally an Eagle annual from what, 1986. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my own little collection now of like stuff I've been getting at charity shops, but like the ones that my mum had, they were not treated well, so they were scribbled in, they didn't have covers, and they were just weird. I didn't actually know what they were. I was like, what is this? And it wasn't until like I went to university and saw girls comics, I was like, oh, that's a girls comic. That's what that was. So there's these weird sort of archival Indiana Jones sort of things for me, these older comics, where I'm like, what is this? Like, because it just was so it just was not part of the comics world in that way by the time I was like growing up as a youngling in the 90s. So I don't know. I wish I had more of a sense of how the Beano has. I'm sure, like, I love dad jokes so much. I'm sure that sort of has trickled down into me, and I feel like that sort of very classic 70s British humor is so much part of my dad's humor. So I feel, and he's a big influence on my comic. Like, me and my dad have the same sense of humor, so he gifted that to me. So I feel like from like family connections, and it has sort of come into my, sort of melted into my blood, but like in really sort of different ways that I, not like a clear cut sort of, not in a clear cut way for me.
The stuff we read when we're kids is such an influence on the way that we view the world. And now that you've got your comps of of the Core Buster
Yeah.
special. Do, what are your feelings about something like this, and what kids? I'm going to sound so old. What kids these days? I mean, I'm in my 40s, you know. Everything I say sounds old. The fact that you just said you grew up reading Kate Beaton, just made me
As
deflate.
a teenager, I read Cape. As a teenager,
Even
I read
so, I
Cape.
was well into my late 20s, early 30s, man. So reading the Core Buster special now, how do you think it stands in the kind of the legacy of kids comics gone by? Do you think it captures the same spirit?
Yeah, 100%. I think it definitely catches the same spirit. I really sort of felt that sort of older comic style coming through it when I was like flicking through it yesterday. You really feel that sort of tradition, that style of creation, that style of drawing. I think a lot of the artists sort of brought forward that sort of like visually try to sort of update, but like sort of and sort of communicate that sort of older sort of that Ken Reed sort of art style. And as a result, it looks very different to a lot of the sort of like it looks completely different to the Phoenix, for example. It sort of has its own visual identity. It doesn't look like the Beano, even though there's sort of overlaps in some of the creators. New Stringer works on both, but like even though you have that sort of it has its own identity. It doesn't feel like the other comics that are being brought out at the moment, and I think part of that is because it's sort of aware of this sort of older sort of style, you know.
One of the things I love, and you've kind of mentioned it already, to do with dad jokes. The fact that so many of these strips are just they're jokes in themselves. So they're just puns on one of them. So Daisy Jones's Locket, Davy Jones Locker, and for me that's part of their appeal. This kind of the innocence, the simplicity, the silliness is built into them from the very first panel at the top of the page. And you know, as somebody who didn't necessarily read these characters growing up, but may have been aware of them, did that inspire you? Was that, you know, you see the title of the strip and all of a sudden your mind starts popping with ideas?
100%, like definitely. Like I saw that and I was like, I want pirates. Immediately I was like, I don't know what this strip is about, but I know that pirates have to be a part of this if they're not already a part of it. It's like that sort of, there's that sort of style where it's just like a little, like a layers of jokes and jokes and jokes and jokes and jokes that build onto this final joke. But there's just so many puns happening, like mile a minute speeds as you're trying to dodge, you're trying to get through this strip. I think I wanted to sort of bring that sort of dad joke into it. And there's different ways of doing that. Sometimes it's a pun, sometimes it's sort of a ridiculous way of expressing yourself. Sometimes it's visual humor. Sometimes, you know, there's lots of sort of different ways to do it. Like people acting like the situation they're in aren't completely ridiculous. There's so many, like, those also like hallmarks of like, I guess it's kind of like Dan Parent, the artist for Archie, has a quote from like Dan DiCarlo saying that Archie is like Playboy for kids. And I guess this is like Carry On for kids. Like you're trying to bring in all the matron and all the sort of funny double entendre stuff into it, but like sort of, and like sort of all that sort of those real classic sort of bits of British humor that kids can't enjoy because they're so rude, these things. But trying to bring like sort of the like you know what, a big sort of part of 60s British humor that I did grow up listening to was Hancock's Half Hour. So that level of like, you know, that's brilliant stuff. So we had like the CDs and my dad put them on in the car. So listen, so those sort of like, you know, oh Fiona, like, you know, there's like a guy and a gal and they go back and forth about hot water bottle, but you don't think it's a hot water bottle. And it's a double entendre. Then you have Julian and Sandy with Kenneth Williams, and sort of like that really important sort of also part of like early British queer culture. like all of these great things sort of percolated in those storylines, and there's so many different levels that you can enjoy them on. As a kid, you did not get all of the double entendres, you didn't get all of the jokes, you didn't get all of the references even, because it was like 40 years old when I was listening to it, but you sort of could still enjoy things like just the ridiculousness of rambling Sid Rompo and his little like guitar and his funny voice. But I think it's trying to build in that sort of the layers of jokes where it's like, where like parents can enjoy it too, maybe just because parents think it's maybe just, there's like the Roger Beefcake is more of a joke for the adults than it is a joke for the kids. But it's kind of a funny, it's just a funny name in and of itself. So hopefully the kids pick up on that silliness. And there's like a silliness that is there for the adults, but also the main silliness is there for the kids, and there's still different ways to engage with it and enjoy it. And I think that sort of part of that British humor culture from the 60s to 70s, which is what sort of, you know, is coming through in Core Buster. And also like has a sense of like what's right and what's wrong, which because like in the classic strips, Daisy always uses her powers to sort of avenge people and to try and make things right in the world. And I sort of slightly changed it in this time. Well, she kind of is trying to make things right, but she's kind of wrong to make things right, because the dad is so lovely and soft and pure by himself, and he's just kind of perfect the way he is, and he doesn't need to be changed. He doesn't need to become this big macho man in order to like be a great dad and to be a great sort of partner to the mom. And she sort of is sort of meddling a little bit in that, trying to make him into something that he's not, and it just completely backfires, and he becomes this terrible guy who's then sort of running around making everybody miserable. And I guess I kind of wanted to sort of, so I had like sort of the silliness, but also I had this sort of the, you know, the, you have to always have like some sort of a moral or some sort of a right, a sense of a right and a wrong in these stories about how to act. And I kind of wanted to sort of put a little bit, I guess my sort of what's right and what's wrong is like, don't try and change your soft, like if a man is soft, that's beautiful, and don't try and change that. Soft is like just soft, pure men. That is what we want in this world. Don't try and make them into something they're not. They're beautiful as they are. So I guess that was my sort of memo for the kids. Hopefully they don't feel they all have to, even though it's fun to be a pirate, hopefully they don't all feel that that's the only way to express themselves.
But funny enough, that's brought me on to something that I did want to talk about, which is the notion of comeuppance, which when you read the old kids' comics, there's a real sense of right and wrong and of justice, and even in the silliest of ways, you know, the person who is, for want of a better phrase, being a dick, usually ends up coming a cropper. And I realise I'm just firing off.
No, you're right. Like the whole idea of like snobs.
Yes, snobs and toffs, and anybody who's arrogant, anybody who puts themselves above anybody else is brought low. There's a great leveling. I mean, and it comes back to, I guess, what Pat Mills talks about in the more serious way with things like, you know, Charlie's War and the other comics that he was putting out in the 70s. That notion of class, but it is remarkable how people are leveled in these comics, isn't it?
They have a strong sense of sort of internal justice, which I think is great. I mean, like sometimes you have characters who don't have that strong sense of justice, and like, I mean, I think that's why Dennis the Menace and Minnie the Minx have been so popular for so long, because they sort of don't have that quite the same sense of justice. But generally, there's like a classic sense of just justice in these things, and that it's not right to treat people like this. One of my favorites from Core was always You Can't Make a Monkey Out of Gus. Who is just like this beautiful, pure little monkey dude, and everybody hates him for everybody hates him on sight. And maybe I'm thinking it now, like maybe this is a great sort of metaphor for racism or something. But like everybody hates him, and he's just going about his day, living his best life, and everybody just hates him. Is out to get him for some reason that's never sort of really articulated why. And just because he's so sweet and so ingenuous, and he's just a great sort of entrepreneur, he's got a great sort of mind. He doesn't ever set out to overturn the tables on them, but they can't ever make a monkey out of him. He always somehow gets everything right, and he always does it in a very sweet way, which I think is a great story. But then also Hire a Horror is always about these horrible rich people hiring monsters. It's like such a great sort of verdict against capitalism. All these horrible rich people hire these monsters to try and ruin other people's lives or stop kids playing, and then the monsters always start chasing them, and it is like I feel like they always, the British comics always kind of come back to very much this idea of like just treat other people right, and is you treat other people right, that's the best way forward. And that's like it's a very sort of simple sort of base morality, but it's like at the base of all of these stories, it's like is just treat people right. And there's all these humor comics are so wildly funny, but they still come back to this very staid like, but make sure you're not a dick to people. But then also thinking the more serious ones, you really start to have that class consciousness come in. But even like Ivolot and Tony Broke, is it?
Yeah.
Ivolot and Tony Broke. Like even those sort of like, I guess it is just like, it's a sense that the world isn't fair, but this is a comic. So if we could level the playing field, we would, and we'd do it like this, and making sure that you understand that even though these people are richer than you, that doesn't make them better than you. And that's important.
The thing, the character you mentioned a moment ago, Dennis the Menace, I think it's such an important one. I know he's not one of ours, but we'll let that fly.
I was breaking company lines mentioning it.
But he's transgressive. Characters like him and the Backstreet Kids and Minnie the Minx, they transgress the rules. They are the naughty children. But I think what is a key element of British kids comics, and particularly humor comics, is that even if you are the hero of this story, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get into trouble for what you've done. And I note that spoilers for anyone who's not read it. At the end of your story, Daisy gets sent to her room for what she's done. That idea, I think, is uniquely British. Even though this is your story, you can still end up getting sent to your room for what you've done. I think that's absolutely wonderful.
I sort of put that in as a joke that I didn't feel like it was entirely justified. It wasn't like I said to be like, she's going to get punished. I felt like I wanted to make the locker room joke. I wanted to make a locker joke. So I was like, okay, grounding's a great way to do that. But yeah, I mean, I felt like in my story, I was thinking about it as like it was an unfair punishment. And she was like, I was just trying to help you guys and rekindle that marital spark. And this is the thanks I get. Like, I spent a whole day running ragged after my dad, trying to fix everything. And now I'm just being sent to my room when he's the one who's like actually physically caused all the trouble. Like, I might have been behind it, but I didn't actually do it all. And she like, this is like, the South London version of Daisy Jones. She's all like, all right, idiot, all right, I'll go in my room, all right. In the 1950s, did a sort of appraisal British comic to sort of, because of the horror comic scare, and to see like if comics were good and like what they would sort of tell our children. And they sort of were like, oh, I don't know about those humor comics. They were like, oh, they're very like sort of, the characters are very transgressive. But then the sort of reason they had was like, well, children have it really hard and they need to have a sense of freedom and a sense of giving adults a comeuppance, because they are constantly at the subject of adults' rules, and it's good for children to be able to sort of see adults get a bit of comeback, because children always are governed by these rules of adults. And that's sort of the way they sort of looked at these humor comics. I think that is something about it that, when you're so small that you can't even see over the counter in the bank, you have to go to the bank and it's really boring. You can't even see over the counter, over the top of the counters. And sort of that sense of living in a world which is completely unfair for a lot of different reasons, but none of them have to do with what you've done. It's just you're born into an unfair world of all of these rules that you don't quite understand. And I think it's a good thing that we have these sort of transgressive, humorous comics where wild things happen, because I think it's good to show children that you can affect the world, and that even not just like they have a sense to play out their fantasies in these comics, but also just a sense that the world is changeable. Like, it is a fluid, it is malleable. You can change this. You don't have to be subject to the rules, and the rules are incomprehensible, and even as an adult they're incomprehensible and they don't make any sense, and we all just do it for some reason. But don't feel like part of keeping that sort of childhood spirit alive is being like, I don't have to play by the rules. I'm an adult. I'm going to eat cake all the time.
That's something that I've always really enjoyed, just those posts on Facebook where it goes, you know what, I realised today that I'm an adult and I can eat what I want, so I had ice cream for my tea. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, that's keeping alive the message of kids comics from the 70s and 80s.
Well, especially the self-lockdown has taught us is that a lot of the rules that we all sort of took for granted are nonsense, and we could have changed them anytime we wanted to, and we could have lived it. I mean, we never had to have gone to the office. I mean, I know some people are really struggling with the not going to the office thing, but like all these things that we were told we couldn't do because it wouldn't work online, suddenly it can work online, and there is no reason to be doing things quite the way we were doing them before. But I guess like there is a sense that we're in a sort of a topsy-turvy time at the moment. We're in a bit of a kids comic, and the way sort of people are like treating themselves, like the way people sort of are trying to regain some sort of control over this is sort of like there's a lot of sort of is like ridiculous situations outside of a humor comic. Like everybody's trying to shave their hair like at exactly the same point. I also got hit by it. It was like something like 2 weeks in, everyone was just like, you know what, I'm gonna shave my own hair. What's the worst that can happen? No one's gonna see it. And like it is sort of like we're starting to like live in one of these humor comics. So I don't know if I have a point about that, but that's my.
Well, it's interesting that the coincidence that the Core Buster special has come out at this point, which is a fairly dark point, and it does feel like you see this not just in comics but in other media as well, that humor and distraction are actually really important. Like you can dismiss them as frivolous, you can dismiss kids comics as just they're by the by, but the impact these things can have is profound. You know, I've had friends who remember poring over comic books when they were kids, when they were unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the latest issue of Core or Buster or the Beano or the Dandy was like a weekly boon for them, for their mood, and for all of their I guess for all of the, what I'm trying to say is for all of the silliness, for all of the antics of a comic like this, actually it fulfills a really important need for people just to have a bit of a silly laugh, really, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like how all of my friends were anxiously awaiting the drop of the new season of Nailed It because we were like, we don't have anything else to live for. Or like my friend was like anxiously awaiting Animal Crossing. It's like you just need these moments of just something for you that makes you happy for a bit, and you can think about, and you don't have to think about anything else. And I think it's important for children to have that space. I couldn't imagine being a kid right now. It must be just completely overwhelming. And I think it's important that children have to sort of like, and the nice thing about the Core Buster is it's not like because the Beano and the Venus, they come out weekly, like, so that's sort of like a standard thing. But this is like an extra special treat because this is sort of comes out like once a year or so. So there's a sense where this is like a bonus in these trying times. Here is a bonus comic of just material and stuff to do, and they were like, and there are activities, which is always important for the parents. But
I saw one review refer to them as filler, and I was like, no, these are a very important thing that we've included because they're important. Like you've got to have activities, you've got to have a spot the difference and a word search. Like otherwise, what are you playing at?
And also, like, I think people like think that activities are like very. I think people have like a very limited view of what the activities can be. Like, when the DC Superhero Girls comic was still running over here, the activities they did, the person who was working on that poured their heart and soul into the activities, and you could tell because it was just the most fascinating activity page. It was like solve a crime through activities, and they like had really thought about a way to sort of do this. I think when everyone's like, oh, the activities, I'm just like, well, that's because you're not doing the activities right. Like, you're not really thinking about how these could be exciting. But yeah, like who doesn't? I mean, like I love a Sudoku. I love a solitaire game. Like it's something to keep my mind going. So yeah, it's not filler. And also, do they know how expensive it is to put together a comics page?
I don't think people do. I honestly don't think people
like,
really appreciate.
It's what? How many pages is it? 48.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's thousands of pounds they spent on that. Thousands of pounds. Like you're gonna really begrudge people 2 pages of activities. They've like put thousands of pounds on the line for this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Wait, look, Olivia, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for
You
chatting.
have stuff to do.
Yeah, I do so many Zoom meetings, But no, this discussion has been brilliant. It's exactly what I hope for, because you know, you're not just a producer of comics, not just a writer of comics, but also you're studying them. So I think it gives you a not a unique perspective, but a really interesting perspective on them. If people want to find you online, where can they seek you out?
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram at Lasso Magica Rescate, LASSOMAGICARESCARTE, or you can find me on Twitter at Miss Olivia Hicks, at Miss Olivia Hicks. It is my professional Twitter, but my girlfriend keeps ribbing me because she's all like, I don't know, like, it's your professional Twitter, you keep talking about inappropriate things on it, and I'm like, oh, but it is my professional Twitter still.
What else is Twitter for than for mixing up professional and unprofessional?
One of these days I'll clean up my acts. But yeah, you can find more of my sort of opinions, like my massive thread about Xanadu on my Twitter.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, thank you so much indeed, and yeah, I hope you keep safe and well during all of
Thank
this.
you. I hope you do as well.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Olivia for chatting away. I found that fascinating. I hope you did too. Now, as I said at the beginning, Zombo is one of my favourite strips from 2000 AD, of all time, really. Al Ewing and Henry Flint crafted an incredible, multi-textured, layered meta-narrative, all the while keeping up the action and, most importantly, the humour. So it was an absolute pleasure to have a chat with Chloe, who is a writer for the Comics Beat website, about our mutual love of Zombo as we do another deep dive. Enjoy. I'm joined by Chloe. Following the first fucking hurdle.
Start.
So I'm joined by Chloe Maveal, who's a writer, a journalist. I mean, you're a Squawkstick Thargo, and I thought it'd be great to have you on to talk, to do a bit of a deep dive onto a series that you have a particular love for, which is Al Ewing and Henry Flint's Zombo.
Yes.
So, do you want to just start off by telling people about yourself and how you came to 2000 AD in the first place?
I mean, I honestly, I kind of just ran across 2000 AD when I was a young teenager, because my uncle would regularly go over to the UK in like the late 90s, early 2000s. So he had all of these collections of 2000 AD stuff. And of course, I'm rifling through his long boxes and I find all these and I'm like, oh, this is fun. Like, everybody knew who Judge Dredd was, and I still have a deep love for Judge Dredd, but like running across things throughout the catalog. But then, of course, I ran across stuff like BR and Quinch, Ace Trucking, and later on Zombo, and I was like, oh, this is really stupid. I can dig in this. I'm a fan. I kind of latched on after that. I was like, no, this is my brand of dumb. Commentary with stupid.
Well, 2000's always done that, really, hasn't it? It's had that kind of humor. Everyone talks about the black humor of Judge Dredd, but also there's the explicit humor of things like, as you say, DR and Quinch, and all the way through to Zombo. So when because this was kind of originally Henry Flint's idea, and then he talked to Al, and they kind of created this mad thing. What was your first impression of Zombo? Let's talk about it. Let's start right at the beginning. What kind of went through your mind when you first saw? I mean, I don't think anybody was quite prepared for what was coming, were they?
No, not at all. It is something that you can just jump into, especially if you've been familiar with like 2000 AD before. It's really easy to get into because at first it starts out very just quintessentially 2000 AD. Oh no, there's people flying through space and they land on a death planet because of course that exists, and why not? And and trust your government, lots of good political commentary. Your government loves you. Just buckle up. It's fine. Then, of course, there is a sentient zombie who's gonna save everybody and take off his pants. And honestly, the real message that I get from Zombo, especially in the current climate of things, is we should all be looking to strippers to save the day. Like we should all be looking to the strippers. Take off your pants. The world will be fine. Let's just hope that everybody has death shadows that they can kind of harness. And
well, we very nearly had Stormy Daniels bringing down the American president. I mean, I say nearly. It's like everything. He's apparently made of Teflon. But yeah, so similar vibe.
I didn't even think of that, and now it just feels more real. And I don't know if that's reassuring or it's wildly depressing. I mean, there's
go on.
It all kind of comes back to this amazing ability with 2080, and particularly with Al Ewing, who I feel like really likes to kind of sneak in that political jab as much as humanly possible in his work. I mean, there's Zombo, which was what, 2009?
Yeah, it's a long time ago now. Yeah.
Oh God, that's unsettling. But there was things like Zombo, where there's the very like trust your government, and then everybody dies. And of course now we have like he's just wrapping up Immortal Hulk, where it's like, oh fuck capitalism. So it's just one big long evolution. I'm sorry, can I say that?
Yeah, but I yeah. I mean, we've always had swearing on the podcast. I don't see why people get suddenly really nervous about swearing. It's like, I've sworn on this podcast.
Look. Yeah, I feel like it's kind of a steady evolution of how he's been as a writer, but this was such a perfect jumping on point for me. It's just, I was rereading it, trying to gear up for this. And with everything going on all over the world, reading the whole, like, trust your government loves you. Just kind of go with the flow. Everything's going to be fine. But then everything is not fine. It's horrible, and it blows up, and there are people getting their faces ripped off. And I'm like, oh, that tracks.
There's this really strong element for me, particularly right at the beginning, and this ramps up quite significantly over time. Al has always been into his pop culture. Has always been there's always that meta element to anything he writes. But you start off Zombo literally with Russell Brand being eaten alive by a piece of fruit, I think.
Yeah, it's some kind of like weird flower that just kind of goes all over his face. It's just really satisfying as somebody who's not a really big Russell Brand fan. So there's so many pop culture references, and I think 2080 as a whole is good at poking fun at other comics. But the Zombo, like all of the collections of Zombo together, just hammer that in so hard. I mean, there's things at the Fantastic Four, which is probably one of my favorite things, because he has these scientists trying to talk to each other, and one of them is writing very Stan Lee-esque, where it's like, if you could just be beautiful, then this wouldn't be a problem. And I'm like, oh, that's Reed Richards. This is what it was, and like what the Fantastic Four was at its core way back when. Like, Sue, if you could just have bigger tits, it would be all well.
Well, ultimately, that's the thing that Al just has down pat, isn't he? He's got that bizarre 1960s early Marvel way of expressing himself, and just how ridiculous that was. I mean, it was ridiculous at the time, because it has to be delivered with such a straight face. And this is why I love Zombo so much, is for all of this ridiculousness, all of the stupidity and madness and the horror of it, it's all delivered with a completely straight face.
Yeah, it's completely deadpan in a way that's like, I don't know how to describe it. You end up kind of quietly laughing to yourself because it's like, oh wait, I know what this is. I feel like nobody else is laughing, and then that's your own little secret that you get to laugh at. Oh, what is it? This was in the free comic book thing too, back in like the 2013. The Planatronics thing, like the dig on Voltron is, I make up the wing, I make up the other wing, I make up the rest. And there's the whole unpacking of that. It's all useless.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, we like all the other, or even was it Obmaz, which is beautiful. I feel like he is basically Batman. You're with me on this.
Okay.
Because it's like just somebody doing something very, very normal, very everyday. It's like, you beware my dark anger of the night. Feel my vengeance. Like, oh wait, that's Bruce Wayne. In my head, that's basically what Bruce Wayne is. So it's all something that we appreciate. And I, don't get me wrong, I love Marvel and DC. I love all of my American comics, but there's something especially perfect about people that can get away with being in that hard and being such a dick about it. It's just perfect for me.
I tell you, one of the things that I always struggle with slightly is describing to people what Zombo is, because you can describe it in plot terms, which just sounds ridiculous. You can describe it in meta terms, which sound ridiculous. But if you're encouraging somebody to read it, what would you say to them? How would you describe it? The look of horror on your face. Wonderful. Amazing.
That's it.
There's a screenshot of Chloe.
That face onto the 2000 AD web shop. I like weird dystopian sci-fi meets slapstick. Like slapstick dystopian horror, is that a thing?
I think
Zombie stripper saves the day? No, there's just no. I don't think that's one of the best parts about it is there's so much to unpack that doesn't just fit into one little thing. It's not like you can hammer it down into one genre like you can so many other books. It's like it is a dystopian sci-fi thing, but it's also just dumb, and it's a zombie story, and there's like pop culture references and political references, and you just can't fit it into a box. So I failed at this task, but I think I'm right, and that's the important part.
The reason I ask is because rereading it, it really struck me how so much 2000 AD works perfectly because it is such a simple concept. So, you know, all the best stories are a simple concept. So, you know, Dredd is a future fascist cop, Strontium Dog, mutant bounty hunter in the future, etc., etc., etc. Then you come to Zombo, and you can't sum it up because there are so many moving parts. There's so many touchstones that it goes to, and I think that's probably it. It's what its strength. It's why it stands up. It's why, you know, the fact it's so uncategorizable. Like you say, it's humor, but it's also horror, but it's also satire, and you can just keep going on and on and on. But it can't be pinned down.
It's really hard to be. I think a lot of comics that try to do the like, oh, everything's really dark and grim, but also it's funny. It comes off as really really contrived. Like you can tell that they're trying really hard, and this just seems really effortless. It's effortlessly funny, but also if you really look at it, it's horrifying. Like the reality that Zombo exists in is just absolutely horrifying. There are gangs of teenagers who are like, I kill myself on video. Sounds pretty rad. Gonna get those views that won't matter after I'm fucking dead. And And it's like, wait a minute, that's actually really awful. Then, you also have Zombos singing show tunes. And I don't think there's a genre for that, but I think there should be one. I think it's been created. And honestly, I basically just want more Zombo. And there's I know that Al Ewing has been, saying like, oh, it's my fault, there's no Zombo. And I'm like, yes, Al, it is your fault, because I need more, because you hinted at me in the 40th anniversary special there was going to be a crisis of infinite Zombos. Where the fuck is that? Because the idea of there being a crisis of infinite Zombos, I can't cope with it, basically. It feels like something that has been given to me and then taken out of my hands. So this is me. If Al Ewing is going to watch this, I can say, please do it.
Wait, it's interesting that you touch on that, because American comics are fundamentally part of Al's DNA, and there's also so much John Wagner and Alan Grant in there, because you mentioned the musical numbers, which is a classic Wagner and Grant humor thing. There's the exaggerated fads, which is another Wagner and Grant thing. But he draws in so many different influences. For you, what other elements are there in the DNA of Zombo?
Honestly, I think the first thing that comes to mind is honestly just how it's drawn. I know that that's very, very baseline. Henry Flint, I have a very big soft spot for. Like, I just absolutely love Flint's artwork, and I think Zombo is one of those cool things because it's you can see the evolution of him as an artist in that, because he had done things like he had done some Dread and some like ABC Warriors before that, and Low Life. He did Low Life, which is so good. But you look at things like those, which are very grim, very dark, and then you see him as an artist. I feel like at these collections, kind of taking that grimness and running with the humor of it that's brought by the script, and just the level of detail and honestly the depiction of Zombo. I can't look at Zombo in any of the panels without like zoning in on his weird pants, and that's kind of what it comes down to for me. There's so many good focal points. There's so many tiny little details in every single page to kind of bring home the joke, and that kind of weird gallows humor. Honestly, like, yeah, the pop culture references are what really do it for me the most. That's what I think of when I think of Zombo. I also think, again, bear with me here. I'm just going off. I'm so sorry.
I said absolutely nothing. You carry on.
How do you hear Zombo? You're in your mind's ear. What do you think Zombo? Who do you think Zombo sounds like? Because I hear Tim Curry.
Yeah, I go with that, absolutely. And Tim Curry and his absolute kind of maddest, wide-eyed, all the teeth out right there and then. You know what? And actually looking at Zombo in those early episodes, that almost, it's uncanny.
You can picture him doing the laugh. Ever watch Muppet Treasure Island? Because it's Tim Curry doing the thing the whole time. And that's how I picture Zombo laughing. So what I'm trying to say with this is, and I'm trying to be super professional about this, and it's not working, is I think Zombo is whatever you want to make it. Even if you don't get the pop culture references, it's still going to be funny. And if you want to keep like focus on the terribleness of the world that the character exists in, you can do that. But don't know where I was going with this. I keep thinking about Tim Curry now. It's a problem.
Well, it could. I mean, we were talking about Henry Flint because it's really important, particularly on a strip like Zombo, where it is a collaboration in every sense of the word. You know,
Yeah.
from Henry's diseased mind backed up by Al's manic mind, you end up with something that just seems to go in so many crazy different directions, almost all at the same time as well. You know, it's like you say, it starts off being a straightforward dystopian sci-fi tale about a death planet, and then towards the end of the second collection, you've had Trump as president, you've had Simon Cowell.
Yeah, with the big circuitry brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, like I said, it's so difficult to actually explain where it goes. The Beatles turn up. They're like weird blue conehead Beatles. I mean,
Yeah.
who would have thought to put the Beatles and the Coneheads into one comic strip?
Genius, that too. Like, okay. Oh, wait, no. Okay. We're backtracking because I just thought of the best way to describe Zombo to somebody. Basically, you limit down his powers. That's how you can describe the whole strip. The whole strip, let's see, his powers are, he harnesses a death shadow. No need to elaborate there. Also, he's half zombie, which means he has the power of a slightly larger than average man. And he has the stamina of a horse on cocaine. Say that to somebody. Say that he's a zombie in tiny pants.
Uh-huh.
And that his actual name is Eric Rabinowitz. And like, that's enough if you're, I mean, I was gonna say you could say that to anybody and they would probably be on board, but I honestly just think I'm completely fucked. Like, that to me would be, I'd be like, sold. Like, if I hadn't known about the character, that would sell me in a heartbeat. I'd be buying it. But I think it comes down to things like that. There's, it's very quintessential British humor. No, I think that it is quintessential British humor of like small little jabs, the small jokes, like the power of a slightly larger than average man. Me, just like, that seems like something out of a Monty Python skit. There.
I mean, that you've hit the nail on the head there, because that is the vein where it's constant jokes, constant contextual absurdist humor that doesn't really let up. And I always think that people talk about how with 2000 AD, it's all about the number of ideas on a page, not the number of panels. So you know, that's always its strength. But with Alan Henry's stuff on Zombo, it almost seems like it's 3 or 4 ideas per panel per page, and a lot of them we probably don't even know are there, but they're just constantly firing and you know, it just almost makes it overwhelming sometimes.
Being overwhelming is appeal. I mean, honestly, even just comparing it to a lot of American comics, which is hard to do, unless you're making a joke about it, of course. But like comparing it to a lot of American comics, there are so many blank panels, or panels that don't that kind of fill the space but don't actually fill the space. In Zombo, there's so much that it's like, well, we're making up for the rest of the industry right now, and it just all seems so packed in there. And when you're overwhelmed by stuff, one, it makes it more fun to reread. You want to reread it because then you're going to catch a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't before, which happened to me, by the way. It was a mess. I forgot that one of the agents was like, he died and I'm so sad because he was a clone of me, but also we kind of fuck sometimes. Like, I'm here for clone incest? It's up in the air. Like, you have a bunch of tiny things piled up. It seems overwhelming in almost a pleasant way, I guess. I can't think of a better way to put it.
Also, it's the jokes that in any other context wouldn't work, but Alan Henry kind of lay them up. So, for example, the perfect example is How Do You Like Them Apples? You know, where it takes like the best part of 2 pages to land that joke, and on its own, it's not necessarily a good joke. You know, it's one that's often been used, but for some, just the way it's structured, the way it happens, the way it unfolds, just makes it funny. It's bizarre.
How do you like them eggs? It was eggs.
The eggs.
Because they keep.
Are you sure?
I
I'm going back and checking because I don't believe you.
No, because they keep trying to get Zombo to eat egg sandwiches, and he's super fussy about it.
Yeah, you're right. Fine.
Fine.
But my point stands. It is it is a joke that shouldn't work, and yet everything about it just for me, it's one of the funniest points of the entire strip.
Yeah, that's in the Smell Like Crime and I'm the Deodorant, right? That collection of it.
I've just got it in front of me.
Which is the best title for a book in the world. So we can stop. We can stop there.
Wait, and thinking about jokes that wouldn't necessarily stand on their own or make an awful lot of sense on their own. The whole zombie thing. You know, it's a swarm of zombie bees, so it forms itself into zombie.
Oh my God. Can I even tell you how much I absolutely shit it when I read Zombies? Basically fell apart. Because the bar for humor has both been lowered and raised. And it lines up so perfect. Why? It's basically the Death Planet trying to reach out and take over. That's how the whole thing started. Bees? Like, you can do it to bees? And I tried to logic my way through that. For all intents and purposes, it doesn't work and it shouldn't work, and that's why I love it so much, because I don't want it explained.
Well, ultimately, that's what we've come around to, isn't it? A bit like Monty Python, shouldn't work, but it does. You know,
Yeah.
there are some massive belly laughs. There's stuff you snigger at. There's stuff you kind of wryly laugh at. There's stuff that is just utterly bizarre, and it feels, as great as Al's American work has been.
Mm-hmm.
This feels much more like his true voice, like a disturbing and unsettling glimpse into Al's mind.
Oh, what a place to be. We should all be so lucky. I can't help but think, because I was reminded, of course, and you said it at the beginning of the episode too, that like Henry Flint's the one that came up with the idea. So it makes me laugh that the idea of like him working on things like ABC Warriors and Dread stuff and things like that, where it's all very straightforward, for lack of a better way of putting it. But I just like the idea of him sitting down for tea one day and being like, I want to make this thing. Who wants to do it? And Al Ewing being like, me. It just that kind of perfect collaboration. And there's so many collaborations like this that don't work, that seems just so wholly perfect. Like, y'all managed to link up at the most perfect time to create this abomination. It works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is there a favorite moment of yours? Is it possible to have one single favorite moment of Zombo?
I think, honestly, I think one of my favorite parts is in the second collection. I can't remember the name of the actual story, but Zombo has had his head blown off, right? He has a giant chunk of his head missing, and then we find out he has a spare brain in his ass. And then for a good portion of the rest of the strip, he has this other voice talking to him, but it's not another voice. It's his actual self, Eric Rabinowitz, which I cannot. And it's his stripper self, who apparently has a wife and 2 kids. Who knew? It's like talking to him, being like, "You don't want to be Zombo, do you?" He's like, "No, I don't want to be Zombo." It's just him completely unable to deal with the fact that he his himbo brain got tricked in being a zombie for the government. That's how you sell the book. Himbo gets tricked into zombie for government with extra brain ass. That's my favorite part.
And it's the fact that his stripper pants are the thing that delivers ultimate victory over Obmoz, because of course they've got an electric charge in them.
There has never been a greater victory in an Al Ewing story than Zombo taking off his pants, throwing them at Obmoz, and electrocuting him. Electrified pants to keep his ass brain in check. Can we please just think about that? Electrified pants to keep his ass in check. Yes, that's exactly what happened. I think that we could fix the world if we all just took off our pants. That's what I've learned rereading this.
That's clearly the moral of the story, certainly.
Yes. Look to the strippers. Take off your pants.
What do you think about the kind of the way that they up the ante over the course of the different series? Because you know the first series is pretty intense, and then by the time you get to Planet Zombo, I mean there's a lot going on per episode in that.
Kind of a shock to the system, isn't it? Because you read the first collection, and while it's still grim, it's really lighthearted and kind of goofy, and somebody sings New York, New York. And when you move into the second collection, there's 3 or 4 stories in the second collection, it does start to get, again, overwhelming, for lack of a better way of putting it. It gets overwhelming. There seems to be more at stake, if that makes sense. Like Obmoz seems like I can't not laugh without saying when I'm saying Obmoz. It seems like there's more at stake. It seems like bigger problems, and there's an actual legitimate villain. Other than it's not a death planet reaching out trying to kill people. It's basically a worse version of yourself trying to destroy everything. Angry zombie Batman. And I thought it was a brilliant way to go about the story, because it was a few years apart, wasn't it?
Yeah, they took place. There was a bit of a gap.
There was a bit of a gap. So that was kind of a great way to. You have the. Let's try again. You have the beginning part, which kind of introduces you to the concept of all the madness and fuckery, and then when they come back, it's like, oh no, we're here to give you an actual story. The stupid's still there, but we're here to give you an actual story, and that is such a good payoff. I think it was the right way to go. I think if this story had been kind of reversed, it would not have gone over as well as it did, because you have to let people wade into the waters of madness before you just shove them in. And no, I think it's perfect. And by the time you get to like Planet Zombo, where there's just so much information that you have to unpack, you kind of are able to grasp what's happening enough that it's still pleasurable to read. Don't know how else to unpack that information, but
let's talk about one of the elephants in the room here, which is at the beginning of the second collection. You have President Trump. Now, this was a number of years. I think this was what, 2011. So let me just check.
I have no. I can't remember what day it is right now, so I'm a terrible person to rely on for that.
Yeah, but 2011, 2012, 2013,
Okay.
around there. And you have what appears to be an incredibly prescient thing, but beyond just the kind of, that's eventually what happened in reality.
Really real.
I think it actually plugs into a deeper message within Zombo about celebrity and about power, and how inherently ridiculous it is and funny, but at the same time how totally terrifying it is. So I'm
yeah, dude, I'm living here.
Hey, we've got our own problems, thanks very much.
Your own version, it's fine.
Yeah. But it's that kind of thing where it's all fun and games until someone dies, basically.
I mean, that's kind of the message behind the whole comic. The having Donald Trump-esque president, all of the stuff that he does, come back through and reading it, you're like, oh no, that tracks. This could happen. Oh God, can you even imagine like Donald Trump having control over a killer zombie man? That's about right. And it was all fun and games reading this 10 years ago. Now it's really real.
I mean, it's horror in the truest sense, in that some of it's come true.
I think the commentary on celebrity is basically perfect, and especially the Donald Trump stuff, because it is horrifying. And now reading it, it's becomes funny again. It's not scary anymore. It becomes funny again because it's like, oh wait, this is reality now. I'm reading a comic about it. This is a true to life. It mimics life. And I think all the comments, like the Russell Brand thing at the beginning, where he gets his face sucked off because he can't cope with what's going on, and Donald Trump being president, and the Simon Cowell thing, which is also just brilliant. It almost makes me uncomfortable because it's almost predictive. And if it's one thing that 2000 AD has always been good at, it's been poking fun at the absurdist future possibilities of politics and social issues and stuff like that. This one was too much. It got a little too close to home, but so has like Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog and all of this other stuff. So we're just gonna run with it.
One thing I did want to touch on was the fact that there's relatively few female characters in the strip, and what you think that means for the strip itself, and why you think that might be.
I hear as the token female.
Fine.
I think that a stretch, but let's roll with it. I think that the strip says a lot about the male ego and about male hubris and all of the stupid decisions that men will make for the sake of power. And I can understand in a way why there are not more female characters, or why the female characters are the way they are in the strip, because that's not necessarily the commentary they were trying to make. I'm just guessing here. think it's based around male stupidity. Sorry, I'll just go ahead and pop that one out there.
Fine, there's plenty of it to go around.
And I think that's a good way to focus on it. Make it stupid, make it fun. And honestly, the one female character that does kind of get her spotlight is, I will forever call her Miss Lawyer. I can't not. Sorry, Miss Handler. She's a badass. She's great. She does her job. She gets shit done. She gets attacked on a death planet. Comes out with a missing arm and is like, fuck yeah, robot prosthetic. In charge of zombies now. I'm here to fix it. And she does her best. And there's also a female scientist who's completely fucked in the head. But at least I was like, oh yay, female scientist who fucked everybody. That's like everybody up with her zombie experiments. But that's fine because at least she did it. This is my really vague, sad attempt to bring feminism to Zombo. Help.
I mean,
it's fine how it is. I think that while honestly 2000 AD does a pretty decent job, I think, including a lot of female characters, and the ones that, even if they are somewhat few and far between sometimes, when they do appear, they are badasses, and that's better than most American comics. Gonna go out on a limb and say that one. I'm gonna get in trouble. And cat. And no, I think it's good. I think the way they went about it was really, really smart. And they did happen to want to make that commentary about how men are stupid, and they did it successfully. Except for Zombo, who's actually really sweet.
Oh, he's adorable. Even before he becomes Eric, he's very pleasant. It's just there's all the killing people.
Oh, he asks if he can eat you. Come on, that's so nice.
But that comes back. That comes back to, in the Tim Curry voice.
I can't do it. I will sooner throw myself off of this house than try to attempt an English accent on this podcast. No.
For me, it comes back to that first episode where he gets out of the pod and looks up at all the other people on the raft, and for the first, and I think maybe the only time, I can't recall it happening elsewhere in the strip, we see things from his point of view, and it is just a frame of the people who are stood there, but they all look like meat puppets. He's seen straight through them, and
freaked me out really bad the first time I read it.
But that just, for me, that perfectly sums it up. Sums up the entire character, the entire strip. He's very polite, but he thinks you're made of meat. Well, you are made of meat, but
we're all made of meat. So we're
the kind of meat he likes, though. It's not like you're made of chicken or anything.
No. We're all just, we're look, maybe it was just them telling the truth. We're all meat sacks. This is where this episode is going.
Absolutely.
We're going into existential meat sack dread.
Well, what's that pseudo motivational thing about how we're all haunted meat sacks hurtling through space on a rock?
We're all you're made of stardust, but so is trash. So calm down. No, I think. I'm showing his perspective, and I don't think it happens anywhere else. I don't remember it happening anywhere else. You get that one little glimpse of Zombo's reality, and that kind of makes you go, oh, okay, makes sense. Also, that makes it. I think that drives home the point of just how good of a person Zombo is, because he has been has been trained, and I imagine kind of has to force himself to be like, can I eat you? Can I? May I please? He's always really polite about it. And that means something.
Well, there's that wonderful response where, hang on, I've gone past the page. It's what they say when he says, "Can I eat you for the first time?" And these handlers go, "No. In fact, you're not allowed to eat any of the people on this raft. That's an order, Zombo." And he says, "But they look so tasty." And it's just the wonderful politeness of this. And you know, later on, there's
Makes him seem like a child.
absolutely.
I have a 7-year-old downstairs, and he's like, "I have a cookie," and I'm like, "No, not right now." And he's like, "But they look really delicious," and I'm like, "Don't give me zombie powers." He's a child. He has the mind of a child.
Yeah, and it comes back to that whole thing about the kind of simplicity of horror, I guess, and the innocence of horror. You know, you kind of look at a lot of the big horror icons like Jason and you know, characters like that, and they're
Mm-hmm.
and of course Damien from The Omen as well, which is my personal terrifying nightmare, where it's there is a horror in the innocence of evil.
Yes. Well, I mean, even the handler towards the end of the first collection says that too. He's like, "Miss Handler, why don't you stay with me? I'm a good boy. I really am." And there's something menacing about that. Just him repeating, "I'm really a good boy. I really am." And she's like, "You like to think that you are good, but you are not." It's like, that's true though. He's made me think that he's nice, but he's.
But of course, the true nice part of him is in his butt.
Not true for all of us.
Are there any aspects that you think that we haven't touched on with Zombo, that you think are really key to understanding it if you've not picked it up and read it before?
I think that we've basically covered everything. I know that when I've recommended Zombo to other people, or when I've written about it on Draken Skrotnig, every month on the beat, I always reference it to a bunch of other comics, like if you like Ace Trucking or De'Aaron Quinch, or even some of the more ridiculous stuff like Devlin Waugh. All these, if it's a supernatural thing, you're not looking to be like actually horrified and like have to take it too seriously. It's a surprisingly light read for how much bad things are pictured. That's basically it. I kind of think it's a perfect comic, to be perfectly honest. It's such a compact, weird experience that you don't necessarily have to understand all of it to enjoy it. And I think there's a lot of value in that, especially right now. You want to read something fun and silly, but also you can go, haha, I understand that because we're all afraid. Here you go. It's perfect.
And this was something that touched on when I was talking to Graham last week when we were talking about Brink. Mm-hmm. Is this a comic that can only have come from 2000 AD?
Oh, God, yeah. I think that if this you have seen, Mulcher, you have seen what American comics have tried to do with zombie shit. Starts with walking and ends with dead, and I'm fucking sick of it. So I'm here to say that if you want a zombie comic, 2080 is the way to go. There's your endorsement, which is I fully believe, because I don't think this could have been done by anybody else. It wouldn't have been as funny. It wouldn't have been as absolutely horrifying and surreal and absurd. There wouldn't have been as many subtle jokes, because subtlety is the key to this comic. Subtlety, also exact opposite. Don't know how it goes together. It's really hard to talk out this comic because there's so many contrasting things about it, which also is a reason why 2080 is the only one that could do it.
Well, that's the thing. As we've said, the minute you start to try and pin it down, you'll find exceptions to every rule that you want to apply to the strip. It's almost maddening in that respect. But this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed, number one, chatting away to you, but also using it as an excuse to revisit Zombo because
Yes.
it is something that everybody should read. And I know I'm paid to say that, but
Yeah.
if people want to find you online, where can they come and seek you out?
Oh, you should go to Twitter and look me up. It's Punk Rock Mom Jeans with no C in rock. Come by this title honestly.
And of course, you've got, as you mentioned, you've got your regular column about 2000 AD on Comics Beat.
Yes, I have Drawking Scrotnig once a month on Comics Beat, where I basically give recommended reading and just kind of ramble and go on a total tirade about how good 2000 AD books are. And it spans the whole thing, and I talk about Treasury of British Comics. And it's honestly a mess, but somehow people are loving it. So I'm going to keep doing it as long as people read it.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time and overcoming what seems to be almost insurmountable technical issues throughout life now. This is how we are.
Yeah.
This is the world.
We're all glitching. It's fine.
Yeah. I was before, but, I'm a robot, so,
Yes.
And thanks to Chloe. That was a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've not read Zombo before, we really do encourage you to pick up the two collections because it is just one of those series that for me sums up 2000 AD. We're going to be back next week with our feature interview with Carl Critchlow, so look forward to that, hopefully around about Tuesday. In the meantime, hope you're staying safe, Earthlets, during this difficult time. Keep going through lockdown. Keep staying safe. Look after those around you. And hopefully we'll see you at the end of this. But in the meantime, Splundig Verthrig.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com.